Real quick, Maha, did you need to restart the live stream?
Yeah, it's in progress. So if you could give me 30 seconds, it should be up. Okay, I think you can go ahead.
Okay, great. So yeah, welcome everyone to our second main session of the day. This one is on Amazon Web Services, which we spent a lot of time actually just talking about. I want to thank Maurice a lot for taking us through all the ways Amazon entrenches itself and expands its monopolistic power. We touched a lot on AWS, which really is unique in both how dangerous it can be and how it's pretty much invisible to people outside the tech sector. We'll be joined here by Ryan Garrity with the Athena Coalition. Before we begin, I want to give a few general housekeeping notes. First, as a reminder, we have captioning for all sessions. You can access it with, there should be some three ellipses down there, and a more icon. Click that and then show subtitle. And I'm sorry, I don't know the way how to access this if you're coming to us by mobile. But yeah, we have captioning and subtitles for all sessions. Second, we're recording the main presentation. However, we'll pause the recording when we get to questions. And I'll keep track of any questions folks would like to ask in chat, make sure that we get to all of them. But yeah, and lastly, if you're tweeting through this, feel free to use the Up Against Amazon hashtag and follow us at For Us Not Amazon, as we'll be live tweeting this. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Ryan Garrity. Ryan works with organizers and grassroots organizations to understand and respond to dangerous tech, and she currently helps coordinate the Athena Coalition. As a researcher and computer scientist, she has spent the last 15 years focused on the economic and political implications of new technology and has worked on various issues, including worker surveillance and automated control, investment redlining, data-driven and algorithmic decision-making, the integration of surveillance tech into public infrastructure, and community-owned broadband. Ryan was previously at the Ford Foundation, the Open Technology Institute at New America, and Social Compact. She has a BSc in computer science and an MA in political science from the University of New Mexico. So with that, Ryan, if you'd like to kick us off.
Great, thanks so much. Really good to be here with you all. I'm a huge fan of For Us Not Amazon. So it's nice to spend Saturday morning with you all. I know Maurice talked about AWS, so I hope I don't duplicate too much. And I want to point out that Ali and Brandon are here, and there may be others of you that are also like deep in the surveillance and tech world. And I like any kind of comments or additions, resources you want to suggest in the chat for others, that would be great. Can I share my screen? I think I should be able to. There we go. Can everybody see that? Great. So I help coordinate the Athena Coalition, and I also work at United for Respect, which is a worker organization that organizes workers at Amazon, Walmart, and retailers bought out by private equity. You all asked for a little bit of a description of Athena before I start. Athena was founded just over 2 years ago to confront Amazon's widespread abuses of power. We really came together because Amazon is not just one corporation among many, but for working people in warehouses and retail, for communities fighting to stop mass incarceration and criminalization of people of color, for people wanting technology that contributes to a healthier world. Amazon today is really an existential threat. So over the last 2 years, Athena has grown to be a coalition of over 50 organizations, including local and national groups that organize workers, fight surveillance, tech, and police abuse, economic and environmental justice organizations, and people leading the fight to update antitrust laws and enforcement to confront the threat of corporate concentration. For Us Not Amazon and La Colectiva are founding members of the coalition and have really helped develop the coalition strategy over the years. The worker organizations within the coalition, like Warehouse Worker Resource Center in the Inland Empire, AWOOD in Minnesota, United for Respect, Make the Road in New York and New Jersey, they're among the most creative and strategic worker organizations in the country. Just a few months ago, we supported a warehouse worker to testify before Congress on working conditions, and workers in California, Minnesota, Illinois, and New Jersey are winning campaigns for expanded worker protections to address Amazon's health and safety crisis. At Amazon, really key to that health and safety crisis is their high pressure, high surveillance, disciplinary management system, which leads to Amazon's extremely high injury and turnover rate. So much like policing in neighborhoods, Amazon employs a management system that's about monitoring workers, then disciplining them anytime they fall behind. Our coalition members are also leading campaigns to stop dangerous surveillance tech from being deployed and developed. Those include Empower Change, Fight for the Future, Media Justice, who's here, and Acre, who's also here, and Demand Progress. They've led fights to end face recognition, to cancel Amazon's police contracts, to end the contract with the Israeli military. We also have organizations like La Colectiva and For Us Not Amazon that are leading fights to have, are leading local fights. Some of those are to have community input or to block Amazon's expansion, like in Newark and San Bernardino. Today, what we're really talking about in this session is Amazon's computational power, which is sort of the heart of its empire. And it's what it calls Amazon Web Services. So I'm going to go through a presentation, and then during the discussion, we can go back and dig into particular parts and any questions that you have. So the first thing to know about Amazon's computational power is that it's centered right here in Northern Virginia. Part of my presentation draws on Ingrid Burrington's analysis in a great Atlantic piece that she wrote titled, "Why Amazon's Data Centers Are Hidden in Spy Country." That's the word that she uses for Northern Virginia. In the article, she drove around looking for data centers in Northern Virginia and detailed the history of why this area became the center of Amazon's data center empire. I'd really encourage everybody to read that article. Amazon's computational power are these massive server farms or data centers scattered at strategic points around the globe, connected by a fiber network, running cloud services for anyone who will pay. This interconnected set of data centers leases computer space and applications, and this is called Amazon Web Services. So Amazon Web Services is not like an entirely new idea. For years, individuals and corporations were renting server space from small companies like Rackspace that also had data centers around the country. But Amazon was really offering something new. You could rent per use Amazon servers, either to do your data analysis or to host a website. And this was coming up at just a time when corporations were both crunching vast sums of data and where you had really actually small corporations like Uber and Amazon who were trying to reach every human being on the planet. And that's the infrastructure. Amazon wanted to build the infrastructure that would underpin all of that. So why is Northern Virginia the center of Amazon's computational empire? And you may all know this, but Tyson's Corner actually in some descriptions is the place that the internet was born. This actually has a really long and interesting history. The lookout tower was built during the Civil War at Tyson's Corner because it had an elevated height. And so the army actually took timber from the nearby farms to construct it. And then a century later, the US military, because of the elevation, built a radio tower to use during the Cold War. And then later, with National Science Foundation funding, at 8100 Boone Boulevard, they built the internet, the Eastern Internet Exchange, which was a private public venture that connected the internet across the United States and the Eastern region. So this area, Northern Virginia, became the backbone for the entire internet. So fast forward today, 70% of internet traffic worldwide travels through Northern Virginia. There's 18 million square feet of data centers. So in 2006, Amazon built its first data center right here. Were running into computational to server challenges as they were expanding their retail sector. And they realized they would need to expand the number of data centers they had and provide a way to easily scale them. So they started to plan that and realized that actually they could start leasing the services to other corporations. So by 2020, it was reported that a data center opened in Northern Virginia every 3 months. And at the end of last year, there were 50 Amazon Web Service data centers in Northern Virginia alone, the highest density of anywhere in the entire world. There's one particular case. Well, let me just back up and say, data centers require a huge amount of electricity and water. And while, as was said earlier, they feel like an invisible part of the internet that has no geographic place, they do require these resources, and they are in enormous buildings. So this picture is near Haymarket, where in 2017, residents in an old Black community that was purchased by former slaves were fighting a power deal for a proposed Amazon data center. And Alec McGintis's book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in a One-Click America, digs into this further. And if anyone here knows any of the organizers of that fight and has other resources to point to, please do that in the chat. So I wanted to share a video really going inside an Amazon data center. This video is upbeat. It's a pseudo infomercial. So what I want to do is encourage people to provide commentary and analysis of the video in the chat, pointing out funny words or interesting messages or things you would want to research a little further into. If you have any trouble seeing the video, since obviously my home broadband is probably not super great, just flag that. This video is about 9 minutes.
Amazon Web Services is an unrivaled colossus of the internet industry, providing the computational horsepower underpinning countless organizations, from Netflix to BMW, Disney to GE, Tinder to the CIA. It earns tens of billions of dollars a year. And if you've used the internet at all lately, you've probably used Amazon Web Services without even knowing it. Join us today as we enter the belly of the beast and take a sneak peek inside an AWS data center. In stark contrast to its carbon boxes, vans, trucks, jet planes, and warehouses, Amazon prefers not to brand its vast portfolio of gargantuan data centers. But these monumental server farms are the very guts of the firm's wildly successful AWS, that's Amazon Web Services division. AWS began life at a 2003 meeting in the lake house of CEO Jeff Bezos. The firm had just emerged strong from the dot-com bust. But Bezos's fast-growing retailer was having difficulty setting up and rolling out its own internal server capacity. A scheme promising fast, scalable server infrastructure was duly hashed out and was swiftly identified, by the more enterprising young guns in the room at least, as a potential spin-off service Amazon could sell on to other companies. Fast forward to today, and AWS rakes in a whopping 60% of all Amazon profits. That's about $50 billion a year. How? By taking on other companies' tech problems in the cloud. If you're a startup in 2021, you no longer need to invest precious capital in vast banks of noisy, expensive servers and battalions of nerds to maintain them. You just rent time on Amazon's gear instead. That's the cloud. When you're busy, yay, you hire more gear. If you're quiet, whatever, you hire less gear. The actual gear in question is jealously hidden from prying eyes by Amazon. Even clients aren't allowed to poke around in the data centers they pay for, and their addresses aren't made public. But here's what we know. Take a typical site in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia. AWS is set to run at least 50 individual data centers in this region alone, covering several million square feet. Believe it or not, Amazon is planning on adding still more capacity in Northern Virginia. For instance, a 100-acre site near Dulles Airport, the firm reportedly just shelled out a cool $73 million for. On entry to one such data center, let's say this giant nondescript box next door to a pet resort in Sterling, the first thing we notice is that security is the overriding concern for AWS. There's high fences, guards, and several layers of intrusion detection systems, most obviously cameras. When access is permitted to very limited people for very limited periods, two-factor authorization is required on at least 2 occasions during the visit. If a visit is sanctioned, this is extremely rare, visitors are accompanied at all times by at least one authorized member of AWS staff. Once this so-called perimeter layer is passed, the next stage of the data center is known as the infrastructure layer. This is where crucial systems like backup power, fire suppression, and most importantly, HVAC or air conditioning is situated. To maintain market dominance, AWS data centers cannot be allowed to fail ever for any reason. As such, water, power, telecommunications, and internet links are all designed with full redundancy. And keeping all those servers, as many as 80,000 in a single data center, running requires constant monitoring of ambient temperature and humidity to prevent overheating. If the worst should happen and a fire breaks out, a suite of systems involving water and gaseous sprinkler systems are rigorously maintained and good to go in a crisis. Past the infrastructure layer, and we're finally where the real magic happens, the so-called data layer. Security is even tighter here, with a secretive array of intrusion detection systems and even stricter review process for anybody going in or out. Even if something minor happens, for instance, an internal door is held open slightly longer than usual, alarms are triggered. All access points are fortified with multi-factor electronic control devices. If a data breach, physical or virtual, is even so much as suspected, the relevant server is automatically disabled and shut down. These security systems are audited throughout the year according to a robust 2,600-point checklist supervised by external bodies. These external auditors can request access to anything in the data center, from humdrum logs to security footage, or even the very cameras themselves. AWS staff are sometimes plucked at random from their shifts and interviewed about topics like the disposal of media, itself a process that's held to exacting and robust compliance metrics. Let's look at the hardware itself. In the midst of all this hypersecurity, it's maybe easy to forget that AWS data centers are fundamentally just enormous banks of servers. A typical AWS data center will hold anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 servers, running on a combined 25 to 30 megawatts of power. It's said that AWS could quite easily double this size and make even bigger data centers. However, like everything Amazon related, it's all a question of finely calibrated scale. Distinguished engineer and AWS VP James Hamilton told attendees at the company's reInvent conference in 2016 that beyond a certain point, increasing the number of servers and racks per center no longer lowers the incremental cost. At some point, the value goes down and the costs go up. And in our view, this is around the right number, Hamilton says of the data center size AWS usually goes with. Thrillingly, Hamilton employs the term blast radius to underscore the impact a failure might lead to in a much larger data center, hence the relatively modest dimensions. Still, 80,000 servers is plenty, designed to take in, according to Hamilton, some 102 terabytes of data each and every second. Significantly, the engineer also hinted that the bandwidth within the center is wildly higher even than that. Ever evangelists for vertical integration, Amazon have made great strides in streamlining and perfecting the servers themselves over the years. Unlike other co-location server infrastructure providers, AWS has a much clearer understanding of who will be using its hardware and for what. Removing this requirement to be versatile and generalist has enabled the firm to devise ever more efficient server architectures. When mundane software operations are translated on the hardware or even the very silicon of the chips, this can shave nanoseconds off the processing times. And at Amazon scale, that makes a big difference. Initially, AWS bought servers off the peg, as it were, from traditional suppliers. But steadily over time, the firm began developing its own single-depth servers, exquisitely optimized for airflow in AWS buildings running AWS software. AWS has even developed its own so-called Graviton chipset since acquiring Israeli firm Athena. These Graviton chips, currently in their second generation with a third on the way, use the power-efficient ARM architecture. This represents a break from long-term Amazon partner Intel and its x86 architecture, and is said to give AWS clients 40% better price performance, essentially putting supercomputer-level power in the hands of regular commercial users. In terms of storage, a single standard-sized rack in an AWS center can hold 11 petabytes. That's 1 million gigabytes of data on 1,100 disks, multiplied, of course, by many thousands of times across many hundreds of data centers all around the world. AWS routers, here comes the science kids, can run custom ASICs or application-specific integrated circuits that support 28 ports with 25 gigabit Ethernet connectivity. This diverges, fun fact fans, from the industry standard 10 gigabit Ethernet and 40 gigabit Ethernet networking speeds, but apparently, according to James Hamilton, offers economies of scale when paired together at 50 gigabit Ethernet. Networking between data centers, essential to provide security and backup for crucial client info, happens over Amazon's own private 100 gigabit Ethernet network, which connects the 25 international regions and 80 so-called availability zones across the vast AWS worldwide network. AWS even lays down its own private undersea cables. But back to our data center. Cooling is an overriding priority. And to minimize environmental impact, AWS, in particular in Loudoun County, Virginia, set out to use as much reclaimed water as possible. This stops the company hogging all the precious local drinking water, which would obviously be a PR nightmare. Loudoun Water, the local utility, are happy to provide this reclaimed water at a competitive rate. AWS pays serious taxes here. But it's worth noting that elsewhere, AWS has installed its own on-site water treatment systems. These prevent pipes clogging up with mineral sediment, which in turn causes costly hassle and delay. And if you think that's crazy, the company has even started developing its own power substations. All those servers use a fair bit of juice, so instead of waiting for slow-moving traditional power companies to develop infrastructure to keep all those all-important racks humming at all costs, AWS simply builds electric substations itself. Day-to-day operations within the data center are described by some ex-technicians as being akin to an ER department for computers. With that much hardware, inevitably things seize up, stop pinging, or require a reboot. Fault finding and upgrading equipment is left to a small army of techs who follow rigorously drilled playbooks that cover almost any conceivable eventuality. Metrics are set by supervisors, encouraging teams to complete tasks quickly and efficiently. Some have complained that the working environment is cold, and it's certainly very loud. In the future, we can expect to see more and even louder AWS data centers come online. From early 2020, a new AWS center opened in the Northern Virginia area alone every 3 months, totaling around 1 million square feet in footprint. And that's just one area. All in all, it's quite the numbers game. What do you think? Do these vast data centers get the credit they deserve for underpinning so much of modern life? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe.
Great, thanks everyone. I hope in the discussion, particularly we can get to that last question about AWS underpinning all of modern life, but we'll save it for the discussion, so take a note of that. I hope everyone's agitated now a little bit.
Amazon Web
Services
Services is an unrivaled colossus. Amazon Web
No,
Services is
just have to listen to it over and over again. There we go. Okay. So just kind of taking a step back to think about what AWS really means for Amazon. There's sort of the money side and the power side. So first on the money side, the annual revenue of AWS in 2021 was $62 billion. It nearly doubled since the pandemic began. Amazon spends $22 billion just to maintain and importantly to expand Amazon data centers and infrastructure. And that was just last year alone. And it's been widely reported that nearly 75% of Amazon's profit is from AWS. So that means 3 out of every $4 come from their selling of Amazon Web Services. And up until a few years ago, it was really AWS that provided the capital for the rest of Amazon to expand, meaning their warehousing and logistics. That's really what funded the growth. The second piece is really about Amazon's consolidated power. There's a fun Amazon loop. Can everybody see that? What it really means in terms of power, we all feel the scope of that power when Netflix goes down, or Yelp goes down, or Airbnb goes down, or Ticketmaster is down, or people aren't accessing their Echo devices. We feel that scale. But there's also pieces of that power that are important. Amazon is able to make decisions about who can be on the internet and who can't be on the internet. And beyond that, we know that artificial intelligence requires a huge amount of computational power with the associated disastrous environmental consequences. And it's only with a server capacity the scale of Amazon's that you could reach like the full sort of power of artificial intelligence. That means the next generation of technology that's built with public dollars is going to be dominated by a handful of companies, Amazon among them. So an example of that is the development of voice recognition in Amazon's Alexa, and all of the home devices like Echo and Ring that are built off of Alexa and built off of their smart home technology. All of that is both housed within AWS, within the corporate Amazon infrastructure, and it requires the scale of Amazon Web Services and all their data centers to be able to run efficiently. Amazon has also allowed corporations like Uber to scale in ways that never would have been possible before without substantial investment. And so you see these sort of low road business models that are able to grow at a scale that wouldn't have been possible unless the world's largest computational infrastructure was being sold to it. So in some ways, it's really like pouring fuel on the fire that private equity and venture capital caused, and enabling not only like the scale of money that they allow, but now the scale of this like computational infrastructure. An important piece of this is that Amazon pretty quickly began targeting government computer infrastructure. The right for many years has focused on privatizing every bit of government infrastructure that they could, and technology infrastructure's been no different. All of public computing, public computers, public data sets, public data analysis is now dominated by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And there are very few choices that governments see in this. And I would say like quietly, it's the next layer of public infrastructure that's been privatized. Amazon sets the contract terms and they pour profits back into their warehouse expansion, their tech development, their development of face recognition, for example. At a recent AWS summit, Amazon said that during the first weeks of the pandemic, 9 federal agencies and 14 states moved their operations to the Amazon cloud. That was just a few weeks over the beginning of the pandemic. In order to achieve this scale of privatization, Amazon's made a point of hiring government officials. This is particularly true in DC, and it's particularly true of the intelligence agencies, Department of Defense, where they've hired folks so that they can then more easily get contracts. One thing is the privatization of technology infrastructure isn't just about siphoning public resources into private investment. There's also a few other pieces. One, when technology is privatized, we have less transparency into the nature of our democratic, or what should be our democratic government. The other thing is that when you pair in this country, the pressure toward privatization and the pressure toward austerity with the kind of carceral logic that's deployed against people of color, it means that all tech is pointed in that direction. And so what you see is data science that's being used for fraud detection. It's being used to track SNAP beneficiaries. It's being used to do risk assessments of families caught up in child protective services, of risk assessments of people who should be let out of jails and prisons. So while like this tech infrastructure in theory, not Amazon's tech infrastructure, but tech infrastructure generally could be liberatory, could be something that expands our freedoms and equities, with like paired with neoliberal austerity and the goal of policing communities of color, that technology is always going to be directed in that direction. So I'm going to dig into a few examples where this is what AWS is doing. And I just want to point out that along the lines of what it means to privatize technology infrastructure in a carceral state, there's a couple organizations I want to just lift up. The Immigrant Defense Project, our data bodies, Just Futures Law, Mi Gente, Movement Alliance Project, Media Justice, ACRE. Those are just to name a few. So I'm going to dig into 5 examples, which highlight the sort of pernicious power of Amazon Web Services in different ways. The first is Amazon Ring. In 2018, Amazon bought Ring. It was a small company selling surveillance doorbells. Immediately, Amazon began making contracts with police departments so that police would have easier access to Ring camera footage. Those partnerships are now total over 2,000. Over 1 in 10 police departments in the country have access to Amazon Ring. So what that actually means is that it's made warrantless search for the police much, much easier. It's also meant that because Ring comes with this Neighbors app, it's encouraged a kind of like neighborhood community policing, community watch, where people in the neighborhood app are predictably posting pictures of like young Black men walking around the neighborhood and asking like, who are these folks? Meanwhile, police are sitting on these platforms watching this and then are sent out to look for any activity that's being reported. So beyond the risks of increased incarceration and criminalization, last year, EFF through FOIA records found that the LAPD was doing Ring requests to find Black Lives Matter activists. And finally, maybe predictably, Amazon is using these Ring partnerships to upsell police departments to use Amazon Web Services. So this is all sort of like a marketing scheme where you start with Ring and you end up putting all your data centers into Amazon's cloud. Just looking at the DMV, of course, Ring has a handful of police partnerships, which I've put up on the screen. I'm going to share a resource that Athena and many of the groups in Athena made to help fight these partnerships. And it also includes a link to the map if you want to see. But places include Prince George's County, Tacoma Park, Montgomery County, the Fairfax County Fire Department, Alexandria. These all have Ring contracts. Okay. The second example, which probably many of you have touched on before, is Amazon's contracts, both direct and indirect, with Department of Homeland Security and ICE. 3 years ago, No Tech for ICE and Mi Gente looked into the tech that was driving deportation and detention. And in many ways, Amazon, which is the sort of data center bubble, underpins all of it. So interconnecting all different surveillance devices from credit bureau data to cameras that we have in the streets to fingerprint information, that all requires massive server infrastructure to seamlessly integrate and analyze data sets. Palantir rests on the Amazon cloud and requires that level of server infrastructure. It would not be possible to link data across agencies at this scale unless you had something like Amazon Web Services. So it's not just like, I'm Microsoft, you're the government using my operating system. It's like the most powerful computational infrastructure that's ever existed being put into the hands of these predatory agencies. And that's exactly what Amazon says it does. On the right, there's a sort of Amazon pullout from their website. What they're saying is you can integrate your data systems across agencies in a way that was never possible before. And we see this with the HEART database, which is being built now, which is the largest biometrics data integration database in the history of the US government. It integrates utility payments, credit records. And then just last week, the House approved $500 million for Customs and Border Patrol surveillance. Much of this infrastructure is going to rest on AWS. Mihense and Just Futures Law are leading the pushback against that. Okay, second example, or third example, this reach goes beyond the US. Last year, Google and Amazon signed $1.2 billion contracts with the Israeli military and government, which means that the Israeli military has access to the largest server infrastructure to ever have existed. Thousands of workers at Google and Amazon have petitioned to cancel the contract, which is known as Project Nimbus. No Tech for Apartheid is being led. The campaign against Project Nimbus, which is called No Tech for Apartheid, is being led by Empower Change and Jewish Voices for Peace, and they're fighting to end those contracts. Okay, two more examples. Last year, Thomson Reuters found that Amazon's artificial intelligence, which translates voice into text, was being used in dozens of prisons and jails across the country. Arguably, Amazon has the most advanced voice recognition artificial intelligence in the world. And now you have that being used by sort of sketchy jails to monitor the phone calls of incarcerated people and their families. Requests from emails and contracts from 8 states showed that that service was being used to look for inmates, for incarcerated people that were talking about dangerous COVID conditions in prisons and jails. So they were using it to find potential whistleblowers. We know that there are dozens of county jails and prisons that are using Amazon's voice to text system across California, Alabama, Texas, and in New York. Worth Rises is leading the fight against prison phone surveillance, and Stop in New York has done some great legal analysis. So you can look for more work there. Last example. You might remember last year, Amnesty International dropped a huge report showing that the NSO Group, which is an Israeli spyware company, had been selling their spyware products to governments and corporations around the world. And that spyware was being quietly put on the phones of journalists and human rights activists everywhere. It turns out that a year before that report dropped, Amazon knew that NSO Group was both using malware against journalists and human rights defenders, and that NSO Group was running on Amazon Web Services. It wasn't until the Amnesty report dropped and it seemed like there might be legal liability that Amazon went ahead and canceled the contract. For years, they were allowing NSO Group to run infrastructure on Amazon Web Services. The thing that Amazon Web Services allowed them to do is to obfuscate that it was NSO Group running the technology. So it actually made it harder. Amazon made it harder for researchers and journalists to document that this malware existed on people's phones. So those are my 5 examples. And I want to open it up to discussions and questions. We can dig into any of these pieces. Folks can share other information, and we can also dig into any thoughts people had on the video.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. So I wanted to first say, like, if anybody who does want to ask questions, feel free to ask it in chat, or if you want to use the raise hand feature on Zoom under, where is it? Do we have the, I think it's under reactions, but